All right, get this. Trump hits India with 50% tariffs in August, and India's exports jump 7% to $35 billion. Now he's threatening to raise it to 100%. So, what's going on here? This is the story of a $200 billion trade war where the victim, somehow, became the winner.
So you've got this paradox, right? On one hand, the expectation was pretty clear. You slap crippling tariffs on a $200 billion trade relationship, you expect it to hurt. A lot. But then, the reality? Indian exports actually jumped. I mean, it makes no sense on the surface.
So, how in the world did the victim end up becoming the winner here? That's the big question we're going to tackle. Because when a country gets hit with direct economic fire and doesn't just survive, but actually thrives, well, that tells you something huge is shifting in the world.
Okay, first things first. To really get how India pulled this off, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of the attack. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. We're talking about a full-on economic shock campaign.
And man, did it happen fast. It all kicked off with an investigation in April. By early August, boom, tariffs hit 25%. Not even 3 weeks later, they doubled it to 50%. And then came the real gut punch announcement. A massive 100% tariff on some key pharmaceuticals, ready to go live on October 1st. I mean, this was a systematic, brutal escalation designed to cause as much pain as possible.
And you know what? At first, it looked like it was working perfectly. The damage was immediate and it was severe. You can see it right there. Indian exports to the U.S. just cratered. They fell from $8.8 billion in May all the way down to $6.9 billion by August. That's a 22% drop in just a few months. The threat was absolutely real.
And this wasn't just random. These were precision strikes on some of India's most important labor-intensive industries. We're talking $10 billion in gems and jewelry, almost $6 billion in textiles, $2 billion in shrimp, all getting slammed with tariffs over 50%. You got to remember, these sectors employ millions and millions of people. The pressure was just immense.
But then, just when it looked like things were getting catastrophic, the numbers did something that seemed completely impossible. And this, right here, is the core of the whole paradox.
So get this, even as exports to the U.S. were tanking, India's total global exports for that same month jumped by 6.7% to a whopping $35.1 billion. So they're supposed to be on the ropes, but they're shipping out more stuff than ever? How on earth is that possible?
It comes down to 3 words: front, loading, strategy. This is the first piece of the puzzle. It's a really clever short-term move. Basically, when you know a huge tariff is about to hit, you race to ship as much stuff as you possibly can before that deadline. You're trying to get in just under the wire, pulling future sales into the present to avoid the extra cost.
And let me tell you, Indian companies played this game flawlessly. The scale of this was just staggering. Electronics exports exploded, shooting up almost 47% in a single month. And get this, Apple literally airlifted 5 entire plane loads of iPhones in just 3 days to beat the clock. The result of all this hustle? For that quarter, India actually blew past China to become the #1 smartphone exporter to the US. Wild.
But look, front-loading is like a sugar rush. It feels great for a minute, but it can't last. It's a temporary trick. It buys you some time, sure, but it doesn't fix the fundamental problem. So that begs the question, what was India's permanent play? What was the real long-term strategy here?
And that brings us to the real playbook, the long-term strategic moves that didn't just weather the storm, but actually turn this crisis into a massive opportunity.
The big long-term answer really comes down to this idea, the China plus one strategy. See, for years now, huge global companies have been getting pretty nervous about having all their manufacturing eggs in one basket. And that basket has been China. So they've been looking for a backup plan, a +1 location. Now, this trade war didn't invent that idea, but it threw gasoline on the fire. And India was right there, perfectly positioned to catch all that new business.
And you can see this pivot happening in real time. I mean, Apple isn't just testing the waters in India. They're aiming to make a full 25% of all iPhones there by 2027. They've already created hundreds of thousands of jobs in the process. And it's not just an Apple story. You've got Dell, you've got Samsung. They're all doing the same thing, pouring cash into building up their manufacturing capacity in India. It's a huge long-term corporate bet. Okay, the second brilliant part of the playbook was finding and exploiting a massive loophole in the tariffs themselves. Remember that terrifying 100% tariff on pharmaceuticals? Well, here's the kicker. It only applied to the expensive, branded, patented drugs. The real bread and butter of India's pharma exports, generic drugs, were completely exempt, untouched.
So why was that loophole such a big deal? Because India is basically the world's pharmacy, especially for the US. They already supply a staggering 40% of all generic drugs sold in America. So the tariff was designed to be this huge, scary headline, but in reality, it left India's single biggest pharmaceutical strength completely unscathed. So when you step back and look at the whole thing, you see this really sophisticated, multi-layered strategy. Step 1, front-load shipments to buy yourself some breathing room. Step 2, use your special economic zones to your advantage. Step 3, don't rely on one customer. Diversify to new markets like the UAE. And then, the ultimate checkmate move for some companies, just build your factories inside the US and dodge the tariffs completely.
But this whole thing was about way more than just clever business tactics. This trade war set off a geopolitical earthquake. It fundamentally changed India's place on the world stage.
And honestly, nothing captures this shift better than this quote from India's External Affairs Minister. Think about it. At the height of all this pressure from the US, they were also telling India to stop buying Russian oil. And his response was basically a declaration of independence. He said India's decisions are its own sovereign decisions. That's a direct, public challenge to US influence.
And India wasn't just talking a big game, they backed it up with action. They fought back on the legal front, filing for $7.6 billion in retaliatory tariffs at the WTO. Back home, you had growing calls to boycott big American brands. And maybe most importantly, economically, they hit the accelerator on their pivot away from the US-led system. Trade with Russia surged, and this is key, they started settling those deals in their own local currencies, not the US dollar.
So, what does all this mean for you? Well, if you're an investor, the takeaway is pretty clear. This China plus one thing is very real, and you should probably be watching Indian electronics, pharma, and auto parts. If you're a consumer in the US, brace yourself, because it probably means higher prices on things like drugs, textiles, and shrimp. And if you're running a multinational company, your supply chain just got a whole lot more complicated.
So here's the bottom line, the final punchline of this whole story. The tariffs were supposed to be a weapon to crush India's economy and force them to bend. Instead, their exports went up, and the whole episode ended up accelerating a massive shift in global power.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. Was this just another trade war, or did we just watch the blueprint being written for a new multipolar world, a playbook for how other countries can stand up to economic pressure and carve out their own path? Because that's not just a trade war story. That's a story about a transfer of power.